everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're going to discuss heist movies. So, last time we decided, based on the theme, to watch Inside Man and Out of Sight. But in the interim, I think both of us were in parallel kind of feeling the absence of the more obvious choices. Movies that came up during our previous discussion but weren't ultimately selected. And then we just decided to go ahead and watch them anyway. So we added Point Break and Ocean's 11 and watched those as well. Because
Yes,
why wouldn't you?
I know. It was once we were in the heist movie theme, like it was just so hard to not say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, but I also like this. I also like this,
Yeah.
and I actually had to like reel back. And there were others I probably would have watched. Like the Italian Job's pretty fun. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's not up there if you were actually having to rank movies, but as just a fun, totally thematic heist movie,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of them. So. That I was tempted to watch that the other day, but I did not. So
Well, I think the other one that I thought about was Heat.
Heat.
I haven't actually watched that in a long time. Um, but that's certainly one of those movies that, a certain subgenre of movie buff really likes Heat. Which is not to say that I didn't like Heat. I just feel like there are some people who talk a lot about Heat.
So I'll just give you my quick summation on Heat. Is I love Heat style. I love the story.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't like, and I know why they chose to do this, but what I want from a heist movie is I want the bad guy. Like the bad guys are the good guys. Like the criminals are who you're rooting for.
Yeah.
So when Robert De Niro fails at the end and Al Pacino wins, like that left me. It just I can never get behind it as one of my favorite movies because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted Robert De Niro to win. And
I
and
think
I
that's really fair.
yeah, and I get why they didn't. I get
Mm.
the dramatic point they were making, but I didn't. That's not what I wanted. So
Yeah. See,
yeah,
I tend to agree that I feel like in in a heist or a caper movie, even a serious one, I feel like the only two really satisfying answers are that the criminals get away or everybody dies. Like it's just like a big shootout and nobody really wins. Like Departed is maybe a good example of that, where it's kind of like pretty much everyone's dead at the end. I don't even remember who was technically alive at the end, but you sure didn't feel like they won.
no, the person left alive at the end was Mark Wahlberg's character because he's the one that assassinated Matt Damon's character
Mm,
once he figured out he was the mole. And
yeah,
so he also didn't feel like he'd won.
yeah,
He was just that was what he was determined to do, because
yeah. I just had so I just laughed because I just had the image of trying to sum up how he felt at the end, which was to just like look around at all the bodies and just say, "Come on, guys!" I feel like that's what Mark Wahlberg would say. All right, but we're not talking about Heat. What we're talking about is Inside Man, Ocean's 11, Out of Sight, and Point Break. Now, I hadn't kind of fully put together, and it's not like we planned this at all, but certainly as I was watching them, it struck me that Out of Sight and Ocean's 11 share a director, a star, and were made only three years apart. And I mean that part's not a big deal, but like the fact that George Clooney and Steve Soderbergh together made that movie, those two movies, only 3 years apart. They both have Don Cheadle in it too, in them.
yeah, so
Yeah,
2 stars. Yeah.
yeah. So that's just some coincidences that occurred to me as we as I was watching. Um, Gosh, I okay. We discussed a little bit before getting into this that we were going to allow our discussion to be a little bit more free roaming, but perhaps in order to get us started in a slightly more organized way. Let's start with Inside Man, which I had not seen. I had seen all three of the others that we're talking about today, but I had not seen Inside Man. So, do you want to? It was your suggestion, so do you want to talk a little bit about why you recommended it?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite Spike Lee movies. Obviously, like Do the Right Thing is on here, but and we've discussed like its significance is obviously much higher than Inside Man. But just from a pure enjoyment standpoint, this is probably one that I just outright enjoy the journey that you go on. And one of the big things for me, which you've known me long enough, like this is not meant to sound bragging, but I watch enough movies and I kind of know how plot things work that there's a lot of times that I can kind of figure out what the twist at the end is going to be. Like
Mm-hmm.
what's the reveal going to be? And there are two main movies that always stick out in my head as ones that never I never had a clue. And yet even though even all the clues are there, I never figured it out until it was actually revealed to me, and that leaves me with such a great sense. And so one is obviously Usual Suspects. Didn't know that was what was going to happen until the
Yeah.
very end. That's a phenomenal reveal. And then the other is this: how he planned this whole thing and how it kind of comes together like that. That always just leaves me with such a satisfying feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's actually two reveals in this. There's one is that obviously that he's hiding behind the stock shelves and waits a week before he just leaves the bank, which of course is the great line of, how do you plan to get out of this?
Just
The,
gonna
the
walk right
hostage
out. Yeah.
negotiation thing. He's like, I'm gonna walk right out of the bank,
Mm-hmm.
which he does. He just does it a week later than everybody expects, which
Yeah.
is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And that reveal in of itself is enough to make you satisfied. But then the other reality is that he was actually doing this to punish somebody for war crimes they were trying to hide from, as opposed to just a purely profitable enterprise. And so the sort of secondary layer that's there, which also is why we have the Jodie Foster character who's introduced, who's phenomenal. This whole subset of this isn't just about robbing the bank. This is about robbing the bank to prove that the bank owner was a Nazi war criminal.
Mm-hmm.
Is just such a great. It's a great texture throughout the whole movie, but the fact that it was part of the driving force behind why he was there is just you don't realize that until he goes and confronts at
Mm-hmm.
the end. Like you think that you think they're running just sort of parallel, but the reality isn't. They're actually woven together, and it's one of the greatest endings between the two reveals
Mm-hmm.
of a movie. And the movie buys us so much credibility with Clive Owen's performance, the way the script's set up, Jodie Foster's performance. I mean, everything about it is telling a normal bank robbery movie, but it's not a normal bank robbery movie, and that's why I really like it and why it stands out to me.
Uh, so I have some questions. This was my first time watching it, so maybe there are some of these that are questions that like I would pick up on repeat viewings or something. But there were a couple of things like so. Let me start by saying I liked it a lot. I think it's great. It's definitely worth watching. So all of this in context. But before we get into the stuff that where I'll just agree that I really liked it. I didn't feel like I ever understood what Jodie Foster's actual role was. I mean, I get that she's like a high level fixer sort of thing, but there was plenty of places where they kind of like implied that she had this extremely high level of influence that they never really explained where it would come from. And in particular, this only really matters because at the very end, the big fancy ring has been given to Denzel Washington's character, right? When Clive Owen bumps into him leaving the bank, right? Which is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like what happens to the ring is left unclear because what we see is him go there, kind of vaguely talk to her, and like show her the ring, and then we don't see the ring again, and it's like filmed in such a way as we're supposed to maybe think she took it, and it's not clear what he's intending to do with it. And I really just didn't follow that bit at all.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like it's left to be sort of intentionally vague because Denzel Washington's character has, there's another subplot there that he has maybe been accused of taking funds from
Mm-hmm.
a robbery before to profit himself. And whether you're supposed to be sitting there like, is he going to do that now that he has been gifted this ring? It's almost like his
Mm-hmm.
final test. And so, what I way I've always felt is that it is I think we're left to believe that he does not keep it and does not profit off of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is up to us to just sort of take that as he did the right thing. So, you know, Clive Owen ends up doing the right thing in
Mm-hmm.
exposing all of this, and then Denzel Washington gets his redemptive arc in that he shows that he could resist this temptation, but yet it's not left overt. And I can see
Yeah.
why you would say that maybe that's not a strength of the movie. So I'm not saying that that was the
Well,
greatest
I,
piece of
I, I
storytelling. That's
like
just kind
that.
of how I left it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that conceptually, but I feel like I'm not sure that the movie clearly conveys that, if that's the intent. Because, first of all, the way it's filmed implies she could have taken it. Because he opens the little box, she looks at it, we don't see the ring again before she closes it, and then he takes the box with him. Is the ring still in the box or not?
I guess I never really dove into that too much because I kind of and again, I'm not saying that I have the right interpretation. You don't. I mean, I guess it's just that never mattered to me that much
And
because
that's fine. I'm not like I'm part of this is just me asking. It's not because I see it as a huge problem so much as if there was an answer that I just missed, I want to know what it is. So
not that
it
I'm
sounds
aware
like,
of.
yeah, okay. So that
Because I think what he's trying to do is
mhm,
leave you with this sort of everybody wins kind of thing,
yeah,
and that's hard to execute unless you have some vagueness.
right,
I think because I think Jodie Foster is supposed to be redeemed a little bit there too, in the fact that she knows that she's finally realized, hey, this guy was a bad guy. He got caught. I'm just going to step away. Like she's not fully redeemed in the same way that the others are, but like everybody kind of has a little bit of a, and I think that's what the point is. Like you can attribute however much to each person's arc as you would
yeah.
like. And I
I
feel
I'm
like that's what it's doing.
I'm gonna say that while there is a lot about this movie that I liked, and that includes Jodie Foster's performance and just general presence in the movie, because I like Jodie Foster a lot. But I think on a screenplay level, it's just really not clear what her role in the movie even is. I feel like you could have the exact same plot without her even being in the movie.
I think what she does though is she adds weight to a couple of different things. One
Mm-hmm.
is that rich people can get away with stuff that normal people can't. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the point of her character
Mm-hmm.
and why the specificities of like how she is this high level fixer, like it's just left as we're told this and we just accept that she has influence across so many things and that people just know to get a hold of her because of the things she can do because because rich people have advantages that everyone else doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that she serves that purpose. I think the other purpose that she serves is that she really launches that part of the storyline of that this thing exists and how important this is and how detrimental this will be for this guy that he has to bring in somebody who's so specific in what she does because he doesn't want this found.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're left with the, well, why are they not, if they're really just bank robbers, and that's sort of where you get into the confusion. If they're just bank
Yeah.
robbers, like, why are they not just letting her do what she's asking for the payment that she's offering? And it sets up the sort of confusion that you don't understand. You realize this something isn't as it seems, and I think that's what her character does.
Yeah,
In the movie.
I can buy that. I just maybe feel like it wasn't. executed quite as well as I would like, maybe, because like I can also see, just from like a utilitarian perspective, it gives Clive Owen someone to talk to about that piece of the story.
Hmm.
And I do also like the thematic element of, this is how these important rich guys get away with stuff, is that they can hire these people that, fix things for them. But I feel like just the actual logistics of how she does her work seemed a little bit unclear. And from a plot perspective in this story, mostly what she accomplishes is to show up, throw her weight around, go in and talk to him, not accomplish anything, and then just sit on the sidelines for the rest of the movie.
Yes, however, the only reason she couldn't accomplish anything is because there was a whole different motivation that we weren't aware of at the time about what they were trying to do in there. Like
Mm-hmm.
if they had been normal bank robbers, she could have accomplished what she wanted
Right.
because Clive Owen would have just given in to her. It
But
wouldn't have
so,
been a thing.
why in the world, though, at the end, when he hired her to essentially save me from this problem, and her report back to him is, not only were they there specifically to get that thing because it's your absolute worst fear that they're targeting you specifically, it's not even about the money, and also they still have all the stuff, but you should pay me anyway.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Some of these things I think I forgive and don't really.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to say that those things aren't forgivable. I just, that's kind of where I wanted to try to clarify, to make sure that I wasn't just missing something.
Right, and I think what's important about my answer is hopefully you're taking is that I'm not going to defend a part of the movie that I don't necessarily fully defend. Like I'll
Mm-hmm.
defend her
Sure.
existence, and I gave you my reasons why I think that character should be there and why her mechanics, how she does her job, are somewhat vague because of
Mm-hmm.
the point it serves. But that is one. Yeah, there are some pieces there at the end where when it's going into the sort of vagueness of how this is all going to work, which I think is on purpose to allow us to attribute our own conclusions as to how well did each person kind of come out of this,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe aren't as clear. Yeah, and so I won't defend that one. Yeah.
Well, but what I will say is that, those questions aside, I do really like Jodie Foster, and so I'm not sorry that she's in the movie.
No, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's great, and I enjoy watching her character, even if I just feel like there's some connective tissue missing by the end of the story. But that's okay, because just on a scene by scene basis, I like having her there. I like her getting to interact with Denzel Washington and Christopher Plummer and Clive Owen. Like, that's good stuff. Other things I really did like about this movie. I like how much fun it's obvious Denzel Washington is having as like this, like, Denzel Washington obviously is capable of incredible, impeccable, subtle acting work, and then he also sometimes takes movies where he gets to ham it up and chew scenery, and this is definitely that, right? And he's having a good time doing it. It's pretty obvious. And
I think I
so,
had never thought about that context, but that's a great point about I think part of the appeal of the movie is I think everybody is in just
mm-hmm,
absolutely relishing the roles they get to play.
mm-hmm,
Like Clive Owen's role, like he loves this whole that whole idea that he can sort of be this clever, guy with a plan that they can't figure out, and that he can kind of have a little bit of arrogance with it, but also know that he's really doing the right thing. I mean, there's just sort of and I think it's what makes the reveal so satisfying is because they don't, outside of some of the things that you talked about there, they don't betray the story. Like it's not when that
mm-hmm,
happens at the end when he comes out and he had this plan and he's actually there for the Nazi papers and all this
mm-hmm,
stuff. It's not like you're like, well, that doesn't. He delivers a character that you totally believe everything that he does.
mm-hmm.
And as does Denzel Washington. Like he's so over the top, and yeah, so you have just a lot of fun, and so the moments that are sort of, to kind of draw back to the category, the heist movie, the bank robbery version
Mm-hmm.
of the heist movie, the tomes that are there of, you know, robbers enter bank, robbers take everybody hostage. Police show up, bring in a negotiator. Negotiator discusses with them. They're trying to figure out how they actually plan to get out of this, and what is the clever way they're either going to or not going to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And those interactions, the hostage and or not the hostage taker and the negotiator, become so much better when you have Clive Owen and Denzel Washington thriving in these
Yeah,
roles.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah. So Clive Owen gets to, so Denzel Washington gets to be the scenery chewing New York detective. Clive Owen gets to be the cold, calculating, smarter than everybody else in the room, badass, right? Um, and they're having a good time, both of them. It's obvious, and so. I did just enjoy watching everybody do their thing, and Christopher Plummer, of course, getting to be like the imperious old evil guy who is playing up a little bit how like old and weak and helpless he is, but also just like playing the role, but also actually scared of what's going to happen. I all those little layers in there. I also think that what this movie did extremely well is something that I think is probably one of the most important tropes of a heist movie, which is the misdirection and the reveal of something, right? And usually it's the plan. And so like Ocean's 11 obviously has a big one of those that we'll talk more about when we get there. But like in this case, there are a couple of layered ones, but the big one is the one that you mentioned already, which is that the actual plan was get into the safety deposit box that they care about, take out, what they want, and then he hides in this room that they've constructed, right? A storage room that nobody thinks anything about. They essentially create a false wall, like 5 feet into the room that he's just hiding behind. So unless people are saying like, doesn't this storage room seem smaller than before? Which, seems like probably people wouldn't be too worried about that given what had just happened. And so, him hiding behind there, that whole big reveal is pretty good. But what the movie I think did really well is, like, what's so important with a reveal like that is it has to be something where you don't get it until they reveal it, but once they do, you say, "Oh, of course."
Yep.
And the way that works is that they showed us them building, taking down everything at the one end of the room. They showed us building a wall.
Right.
They showed digging a hole.
Yeah.
But they're also showing us all of these other things, like dealing with the hostages and making them change clothes and taking away everybody's phones and all of that business that ultimately turns out it's like a red herring, right? The whole thing is it's throwing out chaff to, and again, it functions the dual purpose of like, in the story, it is to confuse the cops, so the cops don't figure out the thing. But in the movie, it also works on us, is that we're so distracted with all of the flash and pizzazz of everything they're doing, we don't know which of the strange things that don't quite make sense are the important ones. And so we see them, like, once you think back, you say, oh yeah, they did show us all of those things, but they didn't stand out in the middle because they're doing all sorts of stuff that is supposed to feel strange and we don't get it, but it's because you don't know which pieces are the important ones.
Yep.
So yeah, that I was pretty pleased with that. Like, I'm not someone that typically guesses those reveals midway through, just because I don't know. I don't try to guess them usually. I'm kind of just like, let the movie tell me when it's ready, which, it's like, I'm not trying to imply that there's any right or wrong way to watch a movie like this. It's just my own experience of them. But yeah, but this one definitely was the sweet spot in terms of how I felt with the reveal of, I went through the movie going, I'm sure there's a trick to this. The movie's trying to trick me. There's going to be an answer that I don't have yet. But once they reveal it, not only does it feel clever, but it also feels plausible, and it explains questions that I had before. And does, the only thing I think that maybe I would like point a finger at in that element of it is there's a scene where I think the cops are talking about planning to burst in guns drawn, and it like shows us that happening, like with people getting shot up and stuff. But then it's kind of revealed that's like only like a plan that they're talking about. It's not what actually happened. But it's a little bit confusing in the course of the movie.
Yeah, I can see why, and I think having seen it multiple times, I think that scene serves two purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it, number one, gives us a POV of like what that's going to look like,
Mm-hmm.
even though it doesn't come down the same way it draws this juxtaposition of when they actually do enter the bank,
Mm-hmm.
and none of that happens because it was all different than they expected. And everything now feels weird because nobody's there, they can't
Mm-hmm.
find anything. So it makes that a little more powerful because you had that POV earlier. And the other, I think, is just to throw more confusion into the movie as you're starting to, if you were trying to figure this out, like you're starting to you've maybe seen enough things at that point that you could figure out what they're doing. And then you have that, which throws you back into this different action movie mentality, and then you lose your place, basically.
Right.
And so that's why I think that scene's in there after multiple viewings.
Yeah. And so, like, I think it's probably effective in that regard, but there was just a little part of me that felt like that was cheating a little bit. Because
Fair.
because it's essentially, it's something that didn't actually happen. As opposed to, I think, when we compare it to, say, Ocean's 11, where what they do when they're describing something that's going to happen and we see something happening, it's like because it's actually happening, not because it turns out that they didn't do that after all.
Right. No, I get that.
Yeah, which again, minor complaint in a movie that I enjoyed quite a bit. But yeah, so I think overall though, just this cast was great. The like all the moment to moment like look of the thing, all the ins and outs of what they're doing with the hostages and the way everything looks in the painters' uniforms, and then the reveal. It's just like,
right,
like
the aesthetic of the painters' uniforms, which makes it look cool when it's happening, actually
Yeah.
has a functional purpose to the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots of that stuff that was really good. Like Spike Lee makes. I don't want to like make it sound like it almost seems like diminishing to say he makes two kinds of movies, but it's a little bit like what I was saying with Denzel Washington in the sense that like there are some movies that he makes where it's clear he's like trying to say something really important, and those tend to be a little bit messier, but only because it's willing to like go places that are sort of more important and inherently messy. Like you can't really even talk about these things without getting your hands dirty a little bit, that sort of thing. And then some of his movies are just slick entertainment products, right? And this is definitely the latter, but it's effective for that, I think.
Oh, it's super good. And so I wanted to say one thing on your last point,
Okay.
just since we were talking about the Ocean's movies, about why it's so important for the trope of a heist movie to have a satisfying reveal.
Mm-hmm.
I actually listened back just because I was so excited about heist movies. I listened to our discussion from 2 weeks ago about heist movies, and we were discussing which ones to watch, and we were talking about the Ocean's movies, and we talked about how Ocean's 12 was probably the weakest. It had the strongest individual scene with the laser dancing, but it was overall the weakest movie. And I think that now we're talking about that trope, that is why it's the weakest movie, is because the reveal at the end of Ocean's 12 does not feel plausible. With like Julia Roberts is is playing also Julia Roberts, and then it was too much.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and I would also just say that. Yeah, the dancing through the lasers, I would also say, is the strongest part of that movie. I don't know that I would say it's the strongest part of any of them, but
I feel like it's my favorite single scene.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But so do we want to just go ahead and talk about Ocean's 11? We can go ahead and kind of move on. We can. I mean,
Well, no, well, yeah. I want to
okay, yeah,
introduce
sure,
one more trope
yeah,
that was present in Inside Man that will lead us into the rest of the discussion. I think that's
great.
important, and especially going into Ocean's 11. So, one of the other tropes of a good heist movie is it's almost like game theory.
Hmm.
Is how does the cop versus the perpetrator react, and how do they play off of each other?
Hmm.
And there is a phenomenal one in Inside Man that is effective and hilarious when they deliver the pizzas with a microphone because they think
Yeah,
they're going to hear their plan, but they know that a microphone's coming with the pizzas, so they put it on a address of some Albanian tyrant's epic
yeah,
long
yeah.
speech, and then the hunt that the cops go through to find somebody who speaks Albanian or Armenian
Right,
or whatever
right.
it was, and then when she starts laughing, she's like, "I know exactly who that is,"
Yeah,
you know. And then they're like, "Oh, you do?" And they realize, "Oh, it's a famous speech." And
hmm,
so the whole that back and forth like is so
yeah.
satisfying, and you need that. That's part of the thing is the game theory. Yeah,
The part that I thought you were going to mention about all of that, because I agree that was another good example of just the cat and mouse those two are playing, is that there's the little moment when they get when they want food for the second time, and they say sandwiches this time, and it's only kind of it's like refrigerator logic though, where you realize, wait a minute, they actually because we revealed that the robbers put a bug back on the screen that they sent out with the hostage, so they
oh
were
yeah,
listening to the cops,
that's right.
including the
That's even
discussion
another
that the
layer to
cops
it.
had
Yeah,
about like we need to get them food. Let's get pizza instead of sandwiches because we need to be able to put the bug in a thing that people will stay around and not everyone go off with their own sandwiches. And so for them to come back and say we want food again, sandwiches this time, it's a little thing that like could easily be overlooked, but when you know what was happening, you realize, oh wait, it's because they heard that discussion.
I mean, yeah. So those are two pieces to the same part of it. But
Yeah,
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 that
yeah.
that part, which again, as we get into Ocean's 11 and some of the and even Out of Sight to some extent,
Hmm.
and in some of these clever movies like that, that is a part of it. Like that's
Hmm.
part of the fun.
Yeah,
You know? So
yeah.
so yeah, it was Ocean's 11.
And I think Ocean's 11 is the right movie to transition to after Inside Man, just because like more than anything else, it's really just trying to be about let's do a fun heist movie or a bunch of people we like get to do fun things, right? And it's not trying to make any kind of a larger point necessarily. And I'm not trying to diminish Inside Man but at the same time, the idea of it's cool that the robbers are actually in it to punish a Nazi, which is good, but it's also not like a deep societal commentary or anything. It's more just like you know,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So in this case,
the deepest societal commentary is maybe what I was talking about that like that rich people can get
yeah,
away with things even as bad as being a Nazi
hmm,
because they're rich.
yeah,
That's probably the depth of where it goes.
right.
You know.
Which is yeah. I mean, doesn't even have to be that deep because, of course, like, you know, Andy Garcia is just an asshole who's controlling and likes money, right? Like it's not doesn't have to be anything more than that to his character in Ocean's 11, but it's great, right? I think he has pretty small amount of screen time, really, but he certainly is, like he's one of those roles where it's a little bit like what Orson Welles once said about the Third Man, in the sense is like the greatest role ever is the one where you only have to show up for a short amount of time, but everyone else spends the whole rest of the movie talking about you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So,
Um, I mean, obviously it's kind of a joke, but yeah, in the sense that they certainly build him up as, someone that, oh, he's this scary, powerful guy. You don't want to cross him. Why are we, taking him on? And then, so we obviously have in Ocean's 11 a couple of different layers of the reveal, right? Like there's the big one with the heist where we discover, oh, this elaborate model of the vault that we built for practice was actually so that they could falsify security footage, which is great. I think that is a good, reveal, both for the audience and for, the people being robbed, right? And I think that there's also like lots of other smaller ones, like us thinking that is it Alan Arkin that has the like the heart thing? No, it's not. Is it Alan
No,
Arkin? Who's that actor? God, is am I
no,
am
it's
I?
not Alan Arkin.
Yeah, that's I know it's not him. God, I can't remember now. But in any case, the guy that with the ulcers, right?
Yeah,
Where we're worried, oh no, it's going to mess up the plan because he's having some sort of medical problem, only for it to then reveal that, oh no, that's actually part of the plan. And we get to see Brad Pitt in a hilarious wig. Um, or actually, was it even a wig, or did he just combed his hair to the side instead of spiked it up? I don't know.
uh,
I'm pretty sure it's a wig.
it was Saul, right?
Saul, yeah.
Yeah, so that's Carl Reiner.
Carl Reiner. Yeah, okay. Like, I couldn't place the name, but yeah. So, but yeah, so that bit. But then, of course, like, there's the whole element in, there's so many of these reveals, right? Like, realizing why George Clooney, aka Danny Ocean, is actually doing this. Like, he wants the money, sure, but it's also kind of sort of because his ex-wife is now with this jerk, and so he decides that he's I kind of like it in this, like what's happening in the sense that there are ways that plot line could have gone that would have been less respectful of that character and her agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the way that it actually does play out, and the way he explicitly says, is that like, I think he's talking to Brad Pitt at that point, or I don't remember exactly where it played out, but like there was a bit where what he was saying is, like, if it comes down to choosing between her and the money, what do you choose? And what he says is, if the plan goes right, it won't be me making that decision. Because what he's planning is to put Andy Garcia's character in that position. And that by seeing, and then by showing her that that's what he decides, she'll make her own decision to leave him.
Yeah, there's so many great things about Ocean's 11.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of them, is that it takes all those tropes and it just puts them on steroids.
Yeah.
It in and of itself, like we joked, I think last time about like how the Rick and Morty heist episode is really parodying Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
But that's because Ocean's 11, in a sense, is parodying all heist movies.
Right. Yeah. It's distilled.
It's distilled, yeah. But what it does is it still delivers it with such a level of solid execution, and that's where the scene you're describing of George Clooney putting that, doing it to get Tess and putting Andy Garcia in the position to do that, to have that sort of like extra piece at the end. It would have been a fun movie to watch without all of that. That's what makes it a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, because it basically just took, okay, let's take all the tropes and so we're going to have style, fun banter, good game theory play between the good guys and the bad guys, a great reveal, and actually I hadn't thought about this until you just were describing Andy Garcia's character for whatever reason. But I think part of the reason, going back to the discussion about Heat, part of the reason we root for them is almost like a Robin Hood theory.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes this fun, is like it's Robin Hood. He's stealing from the rich to give to the poor or whatever. There's all these extra, and that's what the heist movies we enjoy the most are, when the person or group that's being stolen from is actually becomes the bad guy.
Right. Yeah. Like it's very much aligned with the whole archetype of how what we like about con artist movies or stories, right? Where the idea, this archetype of the lovable trickster who's maybe not 100% good, but he's kind of got a heart of gold, and what he does is he uses his wits to make bad people give him their money, and then he, and maybe he spends it on himself, but the point is that he's only conning bad people, right? And that's, I think, a pretty common like sort of archetype in a lot of movies and just storytelling in general. And it happens to be one that I really enjoy, but I also enjoy it enough to deconstruct it a little bit, just because it's like, in real life, that's kind of not how these things actually work, generally speaking. Con artists in general are not generally actually lovable tricksters. They're actually basically awful people who abuse, the things that we tend to value in society, like being, trusting and open and generous. And
Right. They're taking advantage of
yeah.
something and of a set of people who are less aware that this could happen to them. Like,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Like the whole thing about like you can only con a dishonest man, like that's horseshit. It's not true. Like all it takes is someone who doesn't realize that you are lying to them.
Right.
Yeah. But nonetheless, it is still fun to watch them in movies and that sort of thing. And so, like, in this context, yeah, Andy Garcia seems like a bad guy. He has too much money. So let's take that money away from him because he's an asshole. Like, that's fun. Yeah, we enjoy it. We're on board. And especially when we're on board, when we get to be on board with George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Don Cheadle, Casey Affleck, Bernie Mac, Carl Reiner. I mean, like, it's like, that's of course, like, because this movie is not the original Ocean's 11. Like, there was one made with like the Rat Pack in the 60s, I think. And so of course that movie was the same in the sense that it was really, and like the plot was kind of just an excuse for these people who all liked each other to hang around and make a fun movie together, right?
Movie, yeah.
And so this is the same in that regard, but it works because they are all likable people and we enjoy watching them like bounce off of each other, and I think that so much of the things that really work are really just about that, right? Like the plot really works, and like the heist itself is clever and it's well presented. But a big part of what we really remember in the movie is just how much fun it is to watch our characters go through all of these different things, right? And like especially when they run into the challenges, things that go wrong, like oh no, they put the briefcase on top of the little thing, or oh no, his hand bandage is caught on the thing, or oh no, the security guard's smarter than we thought, or like that sort of thing. All of that stuff. So we enjoy watching them overcome and outsmart all of these obstacles, right?
Yeah. We also really enjoy their interactions, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's really clever in how they do it, because like the George Clooney Brad Pitt interactions are all super suave, like we're the experienced guys.
Yeah.
And then when you throw Matt Damon into the mix, they're almost like mentoring him,
Mm-hmm.
with sort of this respect for who he is because of his dad and like all that. And then you have the Scott Conn and Casey Affleck,
Mm-hmm.
who are super talented at what they do, but they're just such jackasses.
Yeah.
And and their interactions like make you feel like they're idiots, even though they're
Mm-hmm.
definitely not. Like, but they're
They are a little.
they are a little, but they're also competent. Like
Yeah.
it's just.
They
But
know
it's
how
sort
to
of,
make their own chemistry work for them.
right.
Yeah.
And so the interactions between them feel very different, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
than when Brad Pitt and and George Clooney are speaking. But they're equally as fun to watch, and
Yeah.
to watch them play off each other and have these conversations, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, God, it's just such it's one of the most fun 2 hours you can spend.
Yeah. One of the bits that I hadn't really remembered that much, but just really stood out to me on this rewatch is actually when George Clooney goes and finds Tess, Julia Roberts at the restaurant, and the exchange that they have before Andy Garcia shows up, and then the way it plays, comes back later. I mean, some of the dialogue exchanges there are just like amazing. It's like, I didn't know there was something, and then she says, "I didn't know you were a liar and a thief," and he's like, "Well, I only lied about being a thief. I don't do either of those things anymore." And or but I don't do that anymore. It's like, what? You don't steal? It's like, no, lie. I don't lie anymore. But then, implication that like Andy Garcia is doing both of those still. But then of course the whole bit at the end where she says something about how, like, I don't even remember what it is, but it's just some playful little assumption like, I was hanging around and thought I might catch a ride with Brad Pitt here, and he says liar and she says thief, and then it's like, oh, it's sweet, it's a callback, it's a fun conversation, and it's just like all of that is just really like that dialogue is just in that scene. It's really good.
Yeah, so much fun. So.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of depth necessarily to talk about there because it's not really trying to be deep. It's just trying to be exactly what it is, and it does it very well.
Yep. It is. Like I said, it's everything on steroids.
Mm-hmm. So like maybe it makes sense then to sort of transition to Out of Sight, because I think without completely flipping the coin, I think as a contrast to Ocean's 11, Out of Sight is still obviously like a caper movie. It's like a crime movie. It's meant to be kind of fun and exciting and all that. But it's really more about the characters and less about the job, right? I'm not trying to say it's like some deep character drama. I'm just saying by comparison, it's more interested in what happens to the characters than it is
more
about.
on like what I was just sort of talking about, the and what you were talking about, like the script elements of like how do these two people talk to each other, and then when you introduce this group of people to them, which made me think of a whole other subset of movies, but the whole Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, and what was the sequel?
I know that what you mean, and I can't think of it either.
I don't know why I just blanked on that. That's the better one too.
Yeah. Well.
Anyway. Yeah. I was just sort of thinking of that. Yeah.
So it was like the Snatch.
Snatch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those and actually even clever enough, like, Snatch had Brad Pitt, who's in Ocean's 11, and Dennis Farina, who's in Out of Sight.
Yeah. Oh, he's so good in Out of Sight too, isn't he? Oh, yeah, you love that character so much. Also, just in terms
I'm
of
turn on my fan and shut my blinds, but I'll be in the room. So
sure. I think there's also just a fun little cameo in Out of Sight is when Michael Keaton shows up playing Karen Sisco, Jennifer Lopez's character, her current boyfriend. But he is literally the same character that he plays in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, which came out like 2 years earlier or something like that. Which I think is kind of funny. It's just like, it's the same name and everything. Like it's not, except that he's with FBI now instead of ATF. Like, which I think they actually say in the movie is that, he's in it with the FBI now. But it's kind of funny that they just decided to have him show up as literally the same character.
Well, weren't the books written by the same guy?
Yeah. So they're both based on Elmore Leonard, and so maybe it is actually the same. I read the book for Out of Sight. I didn't read it for Jackie Brown. I'm not sure actually if it might have literally been the same guy in those books too. Yeah. Maybe it is.
I don't know either, but yeah.
But it is fun though that if that's the case, different studios both making Elmore Leonard adaptations with different directors and different casts, but they decided to go with Michael Keaton
Right, and you
again
then
for the
overlap
character.
characters
Yeah. I,
for 10 minutes of the
which is
movie.
fun, especially because like he's barely in it. It's mostly he's in it to be kind of a doofus, which makes us want more for her to be with George Clooney, right? You know, that's kind of the point of the character.
Yeah.
But it's also enormously fun to watch Dennis Farina give him a hard time. Especially when we're watching how clever Dennis Farina is being with his language, and then just cuts to Michael Keaton just with dumb stare, like obviously Michael Keaton is a really smart guy, but like he's playing the character who's just like just not following the clever little turns of phrase
Yeah.
that.
He says there's like a joke about like, oh, instead of somebody who's, cheating on their wife and pretending to be in love with somebody else or whatever, and he's just like, yeah.
So it's like basically it makes it, it's just fine to cheat as long as you don't get caught, right? And it's like, he's not making the connection, but yeah, it's great stuff. Oh, but yeah, so Dennis Farina is great, like, and here's and his chemistry with Jennifer Lopez is great. So here's the thing, like, without wanting it to sound like an insult to Jennifer Lopez necessarily, I love her in this movie in a way that I've really not felt about her in anything else she's been in. I don't know what it is, but like I thought she was amazing in this, and then like everything other thing she's been in, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was just the perfect chemistry of the character and the director or what.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't want to say it's just same as like how you were kind of qualifying some of your stuff about Inside Man. Like I don't want to say that I mean I think she did a great job in this movie also, but I do think that she was the weakest of the actors in it, not the weakest character. I mean, she's a strong character, but I just so what that leads me to kind of conclude is that it's probably what you were saying is that this was just a perfect. The script and the role and the interaction and who she's working with, like it just worked for her because it does work in this movie, but she isn't Don Cheadle. She isn't George Clooney. She isn't Dennis Farina. I mean, she isn't even,
Steve Zahn.
Steve Zahn. Yeah.
Ving Rhames. I mean, Steve Zahn he's another example of that though, where like he is so amazing in this movie and he's been pretty good in other things, but I've never liked him as much as I do in this one.
No, yeah, I mean, this is another great role for him where that sort of, pseudo stoner, whatever, like it is funny in this movie, but it's also like they wrote the plot around needing a guy to act like that, and that I think that's part of what makes him so much better in this movie is like the things that happen that he instigates only work because you believe that's how he is.
Yeah.
Like her convincing him to just drive away and leave them on the side of the road. Yeah. Like that if he isn't the perfect character for that scene seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like why would the guy who they hired take the girl who drove him to the thing, like it doesn't make sense.
Well, and I love that he does it and then immediately regrets it. Like even as he's driving away, he is already talking himself back out of it. Like those guys are going to be so disappointed in me.
Right, and then the probably the next most unbelievable scene, if it's not done by him, is the confession of everything they're about to do, which only works because they're not actually going to do it when he thinks they're going to do it because they've realized that he just tells everybody everything.
Yeah,
and again, in a lesser movie or with a lesser performance. That's an absurd. I mean, that's the I'm going to confess everything before I shoot you, but I'm going to instead of just shooting you and not worrying about confessing to you. Like it's not. It's sort of that trope in like action movies,
right? But like this movie has.
Why would he tell her all those things?
Yeah. Well, this movie has an incredible cast, though, in the sense, and I don't just mean cast like the actors and actresses, because it's the writing too, but like. The ensemble of characters that this story focuses on is kind of amazing because you've got your primary characters of George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, and then you've got your secondary characters around them. We've got Buddy and Glenn and Don Cheadle's character Snoop, and and all like, and then you've got tertiary characters, but like almost every character that has more than a line or so is memorable in one way or another, right? Like the two different guys that both try to hit on Jennifer Lopez at the hotel bar are distinct from one another. Like, I mean, I just feel like the movie is good in a way of having all of these different characters be interesting in their own way. And like Buddy's whole thing of like, because on the one hand, this idea of a criminal who continues to commit crimes, but then does continuously also call his sister to essentially like confess his sins to the point where more than once he's gotten locked up because of that exact behavior, and yet he continues to do it. And at one point, George Clooney basically saying, "So how long were you with that girl, like the prostitute he had picked up? And then how long were you on your phone with your sister afterwards?" It's like 45 minutes and 2 hours. And it's, but at the same time, because we like Ving Rhames and because the writing is good, like that sort of contradictory behavior like becomes a memorable character instead of just being like, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do that? Right. And then you've got, Catherine Keener as Adele, Luis Guzman as, Chino. And, I just mean like Albert Brooks.
Albert Brooks is phenomenal.
Right?
Yeah, I didn't forget about him.
Yeah. So but like how many characters have we named here where we know all of them? And like I don't really know the actor, but the guy playing White Boy Bob, the guy playing Snoop's other guy, what's his face?
Maurice?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I just mean like all of these are memorable.
Maurice is in like 2 scenes.
Yeah.
But they're 2 scenes that are drawn together so perfectly that you understand exactly his motivation. Like, he tries to rape Jennifer Lopez, and then he tries to rape the maid later.
Right. Yeah. So like he's not a complicated character, but he's certainly a memorable one who performs the story function. Right. Like if not for him being the way he is, Jack probably doesn't go back into the house. After he and Buddy get away with the diamonds, right?
Yeah, he's going back because he's a better, good person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I'm just suddenly remembering how there's, before White Boy Bob's ultimate fate, when they show him going up those same stairs earlier in that whole sequence, he trips in the exact same way. He just didn't have his gun out that time.
I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. So there's just an earlier bit where they're all just coming into the house where he goes up the stairs and trips in the same way. And then, of course, later it's paid off because he's coming after George Clooney with the gun and just blows his own head off. What I like about... So, first of all, just from an acting perspective, we've got George Clooney playing almost identical character to Danny Ocean, really, right? Like... It's a little bit less slick, right? Like he's the bank robber that gets caught repeatedly, but then Danny Ocean is in jail when we start the movie of Ocean's 11, right? And then he goes back to jail for a shorter period of time for parole violation, right? And so like there's a lot of overlap there, but George Clooney is George Clooney, right? He is one of those guys who we don't really care if he disappears into a unique character in every movie. But then, of course,
he does play a lot of variations of the same character.
Yeah, which I'm not. It's not even a criticism. It's just an observation because, like,
and if we enjoy it,
yeah. Brad Pitt tends to do the same thing. There are certainly some movies where he'll expand his range some, but in a lot of them, he's mostly playing variations of Brad Pitt, the guy, right? Which is fine because he's Brad Pitt. We like watching Brad Pitt be Brad Pitt.
Right, exactly. You cast him correctly. You give him the variation that is good enough, and we enjoy it. And if we enjoy it, then who cares? Yeah.
Well, and like even Ving Rhames kind of does that too, right? Like he is very good at playing that kind of guy, and we like seeing him play that kind of guy in a variety of different movies. Like obviously in Pulp Fiction, he's a little different. He's more like menacing and not lovable. but like, I just comparing to like the first Mission Impossible, for example, which we're going to talk more about, but like he's in that one too, and he's playing in many respects a very similar kind of guy as in this. But Don Cheadle, by comparison, like totally different character in this movie compared to uh, Ocean's 11, right?
Yes.
In one he's the over the top Cockney rhyming slang explosions expert, and in this he's the badass Detroit, tough guy.
Former boxer. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the yeah, but it's a great cast. But one of the things that I think I want to highlight too, and this just comes down to Steven Soderbergh as being a really great director and hiring good people to do all the behind the camera stuff. We didn't really talk about this with Ocean's 11, but it's also true there. He just knows how to mix and match and cut between scenes to keep the momentum going in a really like incredible way, and in ways that I think are really like artistic, even like where like it not only just brings out the most of the scenes themselves, but actually can produce like a gestalt of it, I think. Like think about the romance scene in like the hotel bar where it's like literally cutting back and forth between them still having the conversation and them back in the hotel room later, and the occasional little bits of freeze frame mixed with slight slow motions and all of that. Like I mean, I think that's really really cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And some of the deleted scenes for Out of Sight, like they have a cut where it is the trunk conversation. It's a slightly different version of the trunk conversation, but it's basically just one static shot for the whole conversation instead of, cutting up to Buddy, cutting away, different things, showing the car. There's no music in it. And it's basically just them having the same conversation more or less in there. And it's way less compelling. Even though it's the same actors, it's like 90% identical dialogue. But without all of those just little cuts and everything, something that in the movie feels still pretty much like a continuous conversation, it just shows the power of those little insert shots.
Right.
The one other thing that I want to say about Out of Sight, and then we can maybe move on to Point Break, is there is one bit in it that has it hasn't aged so well, and but it's actually a relatively small piece. But part of why I want to mention it is because the deleted scenes give a little bit of extra context there. And basically what it is that I'm talking about is there's the scene where in order to get Glenn to like supposedly prove himself to to Don Cheadle's character, but what we can see is really more about like, if you commit a crime in our presence, then we know that you're we've got you. You have to do what we say. Right? Because like it's not about like, oh, can you do this? It's more about like, we need to have leverage on you. But it basically they go and assassinate a drug dealer who has been disobeying whatever Snoop's directives are or whatever. But the character is a cross-dresser who we barely see in the movie, but it's also just played as a little bit of random detail. Now, in the movie, I don't actually think it's that big a deal. They don't really make a big thing about it. It's just kind of like it's a color detail thrown in there that doesn't feel fun. But at the same time, one of the things that I think is interesting is in the deleted scenes, they reveal that they actually shot more stuff in and around that whole thing. Like not like a lot more stuff of the crime itself, but like Jennifer Lopez's character going to that crime scene with her detective friend. And there is more stuff in those scenes that would have aged very badly. And I won't even like get into the details of it, but there was just a lot more of the sort of stuff that you like, oh. But what I think is interesting just to talk about in that context is they took that stuff out, right? Like before the actual movie got made, or released, they decided, I think, rightly, maybe we don't need that in there. But it's fair to talk about some of that stuff. But Out of Sight is a favorite of mine. I just feel like it's so stylish and the characters are so memorable. I just love the whole sort of thing. We even get the nice cameo of Samuel L. Jackson at the end, with the sort of reveal that, because this just the whole dynamic of, the bank robber and the U.S. Marshal that are kind of in love with each other. And like, I like that the movie kind of lets us be more or less on her side, and it's Dennis Farina's character that gives us permission to feel this way, which is she is absolutely not doing the right thing by like helping him out and making it like the implication being she's going to let him escape. Like, from a legal perspective, I think we would probably say our U.S. Marshals shouldn't do that sort of thing. But at the same time, I like that the movie has Dennis Farina as this former cop essentially give her permission to do that. Like, not that he's the person who needs to give permission for that, but it's like basically plays it up as like, oh, sure. Yeah, no, that seems fine. Go for it. But yeah, I just like everything about it.
No, I agree with all those things you said. I was just looking at the time because I have dinner on a slow cooker that I have to like go get or it will overcook. So,
well,
we may have to eject from the Point Break conversation.
Okay.
And since we have a couple other upcoming things that I would rather spend the next 10 to 15
that's fine.
discussing.
Point Break is also lots of fun. It has good action. It has good. Keanu Reeves is not a good actor in it, but he is still Keanu Reeves, which is pretty good all by itself. Patrick Swayze's great.
Yeah, what I thought would be fun would be maybe later on down the line when we're ready to watch it again, is to watch Point Break and the remake of Point Break, and just make that an episode.
Yeah, maybe we can do that. I have not seen the remake. You have recommended it.
That would be a new one for you.
Yeah, you have recommended it. I can't help but confess to be a little bit skeptical, but at the same time, I do trust your taste generally, so maybe I will be pleasantly surprised.
It leans into different things, and it was, but I respected that in a remake because it didn't try to remake the movie. It took some of the things that were fun, updated them to whatever 2015 or whatever, and it's fine. But I think that would be a fun. I would like to have that conversation with an extended period of time.
Sure.
Because I love Point Break and I enjoyed the remake. I'm not trying to say they're equal by any means, but that could be its own opportunity for you to watch that.
Sure.
So let's talk about a couple of our other upcoming things.
Yes, we have a long-term project in mind, and then we'll plan for our next episode. So, do you want to announce? You want to describe our thoughts?
Project?
Yeah.
So we have discussed offline, sort of the comparisons between Mission Impossible as a series and James Bond as a series.
Yeah, the movie franchises specifically.
Movie franchises, yeah. And we don't think they're equivalent, but we think there are interesting things that overlap that we wanted to talk about. Yeah. So what we've decided to do is over the long term, we're going to rewatch every Mission Impossible, and we're going to pick, because there's 6 Mission Impossibles, right?
Correct.
So we're going to take the top 6 Bond films that we determined. I have some ideas, and I have some that we need to debate, and maybe we can wait. And then we'll rewatch all of them and discuss their individual merits and the similarities or differences between the two. So I'm excited about that. I like watching those movies. I think they're one of the things that's the most fun about them. They're very escapist and they're very fun. So
yeah, well, and in some ways, it's easy to think of the Mission Impossible series as the the much more recent where the Bond has the longer history, and that's true to some extent. But it's also true that the first Mission Impossible movie was made in 1996. That's almost 25 years
Yep.
for Tom Cruise playing Ethan Hunt in these movies. So it's a legacy in its own right now. Of course, Bond obviously has more movies over a longer period of time, but it's just not as dramatic as people's instinct might be to forget how long ago 1996 was.
Right. What I think is the most interesting to me is sort of the evolution of the franchises.
Yeah.
Because Mission Impossible has evolved. I mean,
Definitely.
the most recent one does not look like the one in 1996.
Yeah.
Just like the most recent Bonds. Well, I guess that's part of. I don't want to get too much into that right now. The most recent Bond is actually paying way more homage to the earlier Bonds than before, but there was a time period in there where they sort of scrapped the earlier Bonds and went with like current what's most fun. But there's always still this subtext of homage. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
So it's straightforward which Mission Impossible movies to watch. There's obviously 1, 2, and 3, and then I believe that the order is Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout. I might be swapping Rogue Nation and Ghost Protocol. I can't remember for which is 4 and which is 5, but
right. I always have the same problem.
Yeah. But yeah, so those are straightforward. But about the Bond movies, we have to pick 6 to match. So how do we pick 6 Bond movies?
Well, I think from my perspective, there's one non-negotiable.
Okay.
Do you have one non-negotiable?
Well, so I like the Bond movies, but I don't necessarily consider myself like a huge James Bond fan. I enjoy them, but I don't have as strong of feelings about them as I know a lot of people do. I mean, I think what makes sense to me is to do like the first one, like Dr. No, it would be the first one, right?
So we should put that in there. I don't consider that a non-negotiable, but that is a good.
I think it just logically kind of makes sense to say what's the first one, right?
So we'll slate that as in our top 6, but that is not the non-negotiable one in my mind. Goldfinger is the non-negotiable one.
Okay.
That is hands down, in my opinion, the best Bond movie from everything about what Bond movies are about to also being a phenomenal movie.
Right.
And so I just, that one is not.
That that's also Connery, right?
Yes, that's a Connery.
Okay, so would have the first 2 with Connery. I would guess that we're going to include at least one of the Craig ones, right?
Yes, so I would my recommendation as the and this is where we're getting into some kind of dispute as we get to the margins. There may be 2 Craig ones in here, but I would say Casino Royale as the first Craig one, as the reboot after the Dalton Pierce Brosnan era. The style that it came with was something totally new, but yet didn't betray Bond.
I think that's my favorite of the Craig ones, honestly.
Oh yeah. And so I think it needs to be in there as well. So.
All right, so we got 3. Do we want to try to represent do we need a Dalton, a Moore, and a Brosnan? Am I missing another one? I think
you're
that's
missing
it, right?
Plenty of other ones, yeah.
Well, no, I mean of actors playing Bond. I mean.
So George Lazenby played Bond.
Oh, okay.
And that's an interesting one and this is one that's up for a discussion point, because he played Bond once, and then the way his contract worked out, like he never could do more, and so he never ever played it again, and he's somewhat forgettable because he didn't do it a lot, but the movie he did is actually one of the best movies. But he was Australian, and there was this whole thing with that. But
was he the one in which
On Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I you know what? I'm not sure I've actually seen that one.
It's very good.
Do we want to include it in the list?
It gets lost in the shuffle because he's not thought of as Bond. But as a movie, and as a Bond movie, it's pretty good. And I'm looking actually right now on Rotten Tomatoes. It's number 7 on
Hmm?
Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh,
Which doesn't.
out of the Bond movies, you mean?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yes, out of the Bond movies.
Okay. Well,
So it's
so do we want to include that one, or what other ones
I
are you
want to
thinking?
so I want to put the ones we thinking about including sort
Hmm.
of on a list of its own.
I mean, Goldeneye is memorable to me.
Goldeneye is if we're gonna do a Brosnan one, we do Goldeneye.
Yeah.
So
Um,
that's number 4.
I
If we're
feel
gonna
like
do
is Living Daylights the no License to Kill is the one
License to
where the
Kill
guy, the
License to Kill is Timothy Dalton, and that's the
yeah.
best Timothy Dalton.
I was gonna say, is that the one where the guy gets blown up in a pressure chamber? I feel like it is.
It's either that or Living Daylights. I can't remember.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which one it was. I
I
think
think it's
it's
no, it is that one because that's the second one. So yes, that is, but that's the better of his.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so is that number 5? Then if we do that,
Yeah. So we would have if we have Doctor No, Goldfinger. Did we include on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
let's put it in
Well,
for just for.
okay, yeah. So that would be 4, and then if we want to also have Casino Royale, that's
Oh
already
no, Casino
5.
Royale was number 3 for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
no,
So
yeah, so
Doctor
yeah.
No, Goldfinger, Casino Royale, and then if we wanted to do like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, License to Kill, and Goldeneye.
Yeah, yeah. Fuck.
I mean, I tossed out Doctor No really kind of because it's the first one. Do you think there's a better one to include instead of that? I mean, if Goldfinger is kind of representing that version of Bond, what are we missing if we don't if we
Well, we don't have any Roger Moore at that point,
yeah.
so I almost want to cheat on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe it does make sense to try to say like let's not double up on the different actors, right? So if Goldfinger
Yeah,
is the better Connery,
I'd almost rather. I mean, it's not really the point of what we're trying to do, but I'd almost rather add an extra movie or two
I mean,
because,
well,
because
yeah,
there are more of them.
sure. So like, I mean, which ones would you like? Like, what would we be talking about if we talk about that?
So, from a Sean Connery perspective, I think that Never Say Never Again would be a nice addition for him because it was the first non-book adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
and he had said he would never say play Bond again. So the title is a play off the fact that he was never going to play Bond again, but then he came back and played Bond. So it was actually after Roger Moore had done Bond for many years.
Hmm.
Sean Connery came back into the fold, and it's actually a pretty interesting movie.
Yeah, I've
So
got the
there's
Wikipedia up, and it lists that one under non-Eon films, which it says are the 2 Bond films produced by third parties, which includes Never Say Never Again and Casino Royale, the first one.
original Casino Royale, which is
Yeah.
off the table. That thing is terrible.
Well, I don't. I'm not sure. My understanding is it's almost really not. It's considered sort of a sideshow to the real James Bond movies.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely awful.
Well, it's trying to do an entirely different thing, I think, right?
Right.
It's really more like lampooning the idea than taking it even a little seriously.
So I'm remiss to not let that be in there. And then if we need a Roger Moore, I think we're debating probably between The Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only. Both very good.
Hmm?
Uh, both have great ski scenes, which are two of my favorite scenes in all Bond movies. Let me just look. Maybe that'll be the differences. Whichever one has the. I'm trying to remember the.
Mm-hmm.
The Spy Who Loved Me is the better ski scene. That's what
Okay.
I'm thinking.
So, how do you feel if we're going to have Never Say Never Again as another Connery, maybe we do that instead of Doctor No. What do you
I'm
think?
okay with that. I
Yeah.
think Doctor No is. It's not one of my favorites. It holds some weight,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, like I kind of pulled it out of there just like because it's the first one, and that's kind of an arbitrary way to look at it. So yeah, if we want to do then Goldfinger and Never Say Never Again with Connery, On Her Majesty's Secret Service with Lazenby, The Spy Who Loved Me is the one you said for more.
yep,
So that's already four, and then Living Daylights, or no, License to Kill was the one we said.
License to Kill.
Yeah, and then Goldeneye, and then that's six, and then Casino Royale would be seven.
I'm good with that.
Yeah,
I just feel like we've got to get one of the Craig ones in there.
sure.
And
No,
I
no,
can make an
I
argument
mean I
for
agree. I
both
think that
Casino
makes
Royale
sense.
and Skyfall, but I would take Casino Royale if I had to.
Yeah, well, and especially since part of what we want to talk about is like, especially when we're comparing and contrasting with the Mission Impossible movies, it's like you said, both franchises have evolved over time, and that's kind of part of what we want to talk about. Is that in both franchises kind of occupy a very similar storytelling niche of being kind of action, suspense, espionage thrillers, right?
Yep.
Like that's kind of what the movies are for the most part. And obviously one is kind of got the British sensibilities of Bond, and the other is the not I was going to say MI6, but the Impossible Mission Force, in which is the politics of the Mission Impossible movies are actually kind of interesting over time, especially since I just rewatched the first one, and there's the whole bit of like, the John Voight's character's motivation for why he turns on everybody is interesting just to look back on. But we'll talk more about that. So that's our long-term project. We're going to be watching those kind of in the background and have episodes kind of where we check in on that. But for next time, we're going to be talking about John Hughes.
Yes. So this only came about just because I heard "Don't You Forget About Me" or whatever
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
on the radio, and I was like, "Oh, this John Hughes movies are really good." And then I mentioned it to you, and you said, "Hey, that'd be a cool project." And then separate from that, our neighbors said, "Hey, you know what our favorite new Thanksgiving movie is?" And I was like, me and my wife were up there, and we're like, "No, what is it?" And they're like, "Planes, Trains, and Automobiles." And I'm like, "That's not a new movie." Well, they're like, "Well,
Yeah,
it's
it's
new to
like
us."
that's like the Thanksgiving movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But
I was like,
but
"Well,
hey, shouldn't shame people for discovering something awesome.
right." And I was like, "No, I mean, I'm 100% on board with that. I love that movie."
Mm-hmm.
And then my wife's like, "I've never seen that." I was like, "Oh, it's really good." And then our neighbor, I won't say our neighbor's wife because she's also our neighbor, but the wife of the neighbors went on with Abby about like, "Hey, here's how great it is. Here's why it's so good." And so the other night she was like, "Hey, I just want to watch this." And so I was just thinking about like, man, John Hughes has a lot of really good movies. Like that would be
Mm-hmm.
great to do.
Yeah.
So
So part of what's interesting here is that you and I each offline picked a John Hughes movie that we were going to have be the two, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, though great, was not one of them. So now that you've watched that one, do you want it to, are we adding to the list kind of like we did with the heist movies here, or what do you think?
I mean, I probably will. I don't want to do that out the gate. I mean,
All
I,
right.
I did watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'll
Sure.
probably rewatch one of the more controversial ones just for some texture, like
Mm-hmm.
16 Candles. But I'm well, I have two that are pretty much tied,
Mm-hmm.
but I know what you're going with, so I'm going to take my second
Yeah.
choice, sort of,
Yeah.
and I'm
So
going to go. We're going to watch Pretty in Pink.
okay.
Yeah.
So certainly, yeah, like that's definitely one of the the top tiers there. And what I had said was that I think there's a part of me that would lobby for Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I think that movie meant a lot
So,
to me as I
so good.
was younger, and what has been interesting about that movie is how my feelings about it have changed over time. Not that I went from liking it to not liking it, because I still like it, but just my own perspective on the different characters has changed. You know, Ferris absolutely went from being this, like, oh, isn't he cool? Wouldn't it be great to be like that? From like, oh, you know what? He's kind of a sociopath, and Cameron's the real hero. Which, but I think that's fascinating that the movie can be the chameleon like that.
Yep.
But the movie that I felt like I couldn't choose any other really over it was Breakfast Club, which I think just defines the archetypal American high school experience in a lot of ways.
Yes. Every American high school movie that has been made since then has been a variation, probably, of that movie. I mean, they don't. It's not as definitive of like we're gonna categorize people this way. The categories have changed. You know, lots has changed, but as a foundational seminal movie, it has to be there.
Yeah.
And so what I'll say, what I like about Pretty in Pink, and I think I told you this over text, is that my favorite part about that movie is it's as much about the guy's story as it is about hers. You know, she's the, comes from the wrong side of the tracks, has a good family, but is sort of poorer and is looked down upon and kind of class, discriminated against. And then he is the, yuppie, rich, kid, but he doesn't like how they all act. And he doesn't feel like he's part of that. And his story of how he goes and sort of battles that and his best friends is equally as important. And I thought that was just such a really clever way that they did that, because it doesn't diminish her story, but it's not at the expense of his. And you rarely see those kind of teen comedies where you have two equivalent, like usually it's told from a lens of like one of them.
Yeah. And
the fact that he has equal agency, which is weird because she is the heroine, and so it's almost like the I don't know. It's just it's an interesting dynamic that I really like.
I think it's also like the sort of a lot of the tropes with a sort of a class imbalance romance. A lot of them tend to be it's the guy who's poor and the girl who's rich, right? And like. We got Living on a Prayer is the classic example, right? Or no, I guess they're both poor in that one. Which one am I thinking about? I don't know. I'm thinking of something. Never mind. Forget what I said. The point is, though, that this movie is good and we're going to watch it. So for next time, we're watching Pretty in Pink and Breakfast Club.
Yeah, and for you Home Alone, fans, like, well, maybe we'll watch that. And
well, Home Alone is different though. Like he wrote it, but he didn't direct it.
It's the same guy, but it's different.
Well, but Chris Columbus directed that, right? I think.
Oh, that's right. He directed Home Alone 3 only, didn't he?
I don't even remember which Home Alone movies. I know Chris Columbus directed Home Alone though.
Okay, well, yeah, then I'm sorry, because I know John Hughes directed part of Home Alone, but I think he might have directed 3, which is terrible.
So yeah, Home Alone was written by John Hughes, directed by Chris Columbus.
Got it.
Yeah.
And that's probably why he directed Home Alone 3, is because no one else would direct his writing on that because it was so bad.
Yeah. So, but
anyway, we'll put it in a separate category. I forgot that it wasn't actually.
Well, there's lots of great John Hughes movies in any case.
Yes. So we have 2 for sure.
Yeah.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is great. Ferris Bueller is great. Those are definitely kind of right up there. And like I said, 16 Candles is funny, but not the most appropriate. Even at the time, it probably was.
Yeah, it has more stuff that really kind of is harder to justify today. For sure.
Yeah.
Probably
so I might watch
great,
it just out of, if I have time, out of just
Yeah, well, it like
context.
I think
Yeah.
part of what's going to happen anytime we talk about, popular culture made, some time ago is that there's often going to be little things in there that I think we can talk about. Like comedies especially can be susceptible to that because, there can be an assumption that you have a very limited audience and it does not even occur to the filmmakers to worry about how certain other people might feel about those jokes because it's like there's just this
Well,
inherent assumption.
and also dark humor at one point can just become dark at
Yeah.
another point.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, comedy has a problem of not always aging very well. Because it's like for as many screwball comedies that have, lasted the test of time since the 30s or whatever like that, there's also a lot of them that did not.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, but in any case, those were the two that we're going to talk about. And then, of course, the Mission Impossible and James Bond movies are going to be going kind of in the background. And so, next episode, John Hughes. But then maybe after that, we'll report back on our first batch of Bond and Mission Impossible.
Yep. Lots
All
of
right.
work to do. But
Yep.
I got my slow cookers timer is kicking
All right.
on. So
So, thanks everybody for listening and or watching. And we'll be back next time. So, watch good movies.
next time.